Mike, as well as thanking you for all the other things I mentioned earlier, it was you that did the donkey work and the detective work to find us that photo of Gwyneth and make sure that we had a good enough digital photo to expand in the way that we have. So thank you for the work that you did on that. But I'm grateful for this opportunity to talk to the wider community and reflect on the years in this role that I intend fully to cling on to until August the 31st at the very latest. I feel like you've indulged me quite a lot over the years, so I'm grateful for your patience, and those who feel that it's dragged on just a bit too long, not long to go now. So I kind of sat down 3 different times to think about all the things I wanted to say out of 17 years of being allowed to hold this particular role. And each time I sat down, I thought of different things. So this is just a random selection of them because I can't edit my own stuff except for time. So I will try to keep this roughly to time. I could talk about the joys and some of the troubles, but mostly the joys of the role, well into next week, but I don't want to test your patience even more than I already have. So let me tell you this story. When I was a student in college, we would often find ourselves discussing the work of distinguished Baptist figures from the past. And this happened in all the classes, but it seemed to happen most in Old Testament classes, not because the characters in the Old Testament were necessarily Baptists, although of course they all were really, but there were a lot of distinguished Baptist Old Testament scholars in the earlier part of the 20th century. And when this happened, my tutor would smile, and alluding to the old translation of Genesis, he would say, in those days there were giants in the land. Now, in an institution like Bristol Baptist College with 1689 on the crest outside the door and portraits of principals going back to 1720, most of whom look kind of like they're trying to intimidate you. One of them was president of the college, proper titles in those days, pastor of the Broadmead Church, secretary of the BMS, and a hymn writer, all at the same time. So when you kind of got that level of intimidation staring at you, it's easy to feel the weight of history, but at the same time to somehow feel buoyed up and supported and to know that you're a part of a chain that matters. So for this talk, I've borrowed Isaac Newton's famous phrase, but it's not because I'm claiming that I've seen further than anybody else, but because I'm conscious that anything I've done, or appear to have done, it's all a trick with mirrors. None of this is anything I've done. If anything good has happened, it's because God has done it, and in order to enable it to happen, he's given me some really good colleagues, both past ones and present ones, and predecessors who gave a great foundation. And he's also given me wonderful students to work with, well, mostly. Well, the ones in the past. No, it's... And it's only in that sense that I dare speak of standing on the shoulders of giants, not because I think I've stood on them in order to see further than they could. Without my glasses on, I can't even see the front row. But inevitably, you find yourself looking back, and I know we're not supposed to do that, John. What was it you said at the very beginning? We should look forward with our eye. Someone's asked me to do this, okay, so please forgive me. In my very first community meeting as principal, that was the very last time it's taken 17 years to be invited back. Last time I was invited to address the community, we were in the building at the college, and I was asked to speak on the future of ministerial formation, and I managed to track down the notes of that particular talk. And I'm very pleased to tell you that I now, that I then knew a lot more than I do now. And I remember, where is he? Where's Rob? I remember bumping into today's preacher, Rob, at Baptist Union Council, and asking for his advice, because he'd been my friend while we were here in Bristol, and he put a very different spin on things, and there he is, told me, can you remember what you said to me? You said, have fun with it, is what you said. And so it's been this strange combination of the sense of history and responsibility, like being handed the baton in the relay race and being desperate not to be the one that drops it or mucks up the changeover. But also because of my colleagues and fantastic trustees and committee members and students, it's been a great deal of fun, nearly all the time. I am so grateful because it's been a joy to have had this job, and my problem is it's enabled me to do all the things that I thought I ever wanted to do. So I kind of, now I'm being told I've got to retire, I'm thinking, oh, hang on, what do I do now? I'm not one of those people approaching retirement thinking, now I get the chance to do all the things I've wanted to do, because you've given me that opportunity. So I'm wondering what to do with myself. But I've also noticed, and I noticed this as a pastor as well, that the past shapes the limits of what is possible in the present. So my immediate predecessors and their colleagues set some parameters. These are the ones I met briefly, like Maurice and John, and the ones I know fairly well, like Brian and Chris. And the same was true for them, with Leonard and Arthur, or in those more formal times, I probably should say, Doctors Champion and Dakin. And it was true for them as well. Whatever had been done before they arrived has a profound influence on what you can and can't do once you get there. And if you decide you're going to be one of those really radical people who throw things up in the air and completely transform places, well, sometimes I guess that's needed. But there is something precious in the tradition which has got us here that you really want to be sure that you preserve, even as you're seeking to make changes as you go. But the other thing is we tend to tell stories, and I've just done it myself, as though they're the stories of particularly significant named people. But it isn't like that, I don't think. We easily tell history as biography. I'm never too sure how wise that is. Of course, individuals are significant, but it's not just the principles that make the place, the influential tutors, like as Ruth was, and the chairs and the treasurers of committee members, and the significant churches which commit time and resources. Local pastors like Rob, our preacher, was while he was at Tyndale. I think also taught in the college a day a week, did you? Yeah. See, they all play their part, and the students and the ones who are on the college house committee, they all play their part in making the college what it is. So actually, when one cohort leaves and another starts, it's different. Everybody plays their part in making the community what it is. We all contribute to it. And so I found myself wondering about my part, and plenty have asked me over the years what on earth I think I'm doing. Now's the time to try to tell you. I wanted to do things in a particular way, and I wanted to pursue a couple of major themes, and so I'll talk about them. First of all, mission. I know that everybody loves to talk about it, but I do feel that this is something that is there in Baptist self-understanding and needs to be deep within how we understand ourselves. But how do you do this? So we set about trying. And when I say we, because I did this alongside colleagues, present and past, we introduced mission modules that were more practical and experiential. We beefed up the mission content in the ministry programme. We sent people off to placements in mission contexts. We created a mission track of all things for ministry students. We started a centre called Urban Life. A visiting tutor came for a term from the Jamaican Baptist Union. We started a partnership with BMS that lasted till the pandemic, that saw groups of students going to India, Brazil, Lebanon, Thailand, Peru, Jamaica, Nepal, Zimbabwe, Mozambique. Any others? I think I've remembered them all. Did I not say Jamaica? It's in my text, but I might have missed it. Thank you. Every continent, just about, and most recently Israel and Palestine. And because of the enthusiasm of the students who'd made those trips, something of those cultures and contexts came back into the life of the college so that we all learned from it. And the purpose of the trips was not just so that you could learn some geography or simply see a different culture, but so that the students would be themselves transformed, that it would be part of their formation process. How can I put this to you? Sometimes you find yourself overseas, whether you want to or not, you have to rely on the kindness of strangers. Somebody you've never seen before arrives in a minibus at the airport, and you get in it, and why on earth would you do that in any other context? And then you realise that you've got this whole programme and you're not in charge of it. And even the programme you've got written down, that Tim's been working on all night, doesn't turn out to be what happens the next day anyway. And over there's a group of people, and they're having a conversation in a language that you don't understand, and they're talking about what they're going to do with you, and you've got absolutely no say in it at all. This is what it is like to feel powerless. If you learn that lesson, you will understand a great deal more about many of the people among whom we seek to minister. These things are important because they're part of forming us to be better pastors, missioners, evangelists, chaplains, pioneers. So that was the big theme of mission. Another one was discipleship. I want to get this idea that this is who we are. We are those who follow Jesus together. And the churches that we're going to serve and the pioneer communities we're going to begin are about communities of disciples. And one way in which I've sought to understand what it means to be a minister is simply to say that first and foremost, she is a disciple. They are somebody who is themselves following Jesus. So this big stress on spirituality and thinking about the baggage that you're bringing with you, all those talks about money, sex and power, they're not about acquiring those things, remember? Lovely as that thought might seem. They're about recognising that discipleship means having a particular attitude towards those things. They are the things that will break your discipleship if you allow them to. They are the false gods that lead you away from Christ, who is the one that leads you to the true God. That's right. So discipleship, being a disciple, absolutely at the heart of who we're seeking to be, so that as pastors, you can help other people with their discipleship. So when you're preaching the Word of God, or when you're paying your pastoral visit, when you're leading the church through its discussions, your goal is to enable them all to follow Jesus just as you're following Jesus. And then, of course, third goal, working with others appropriately gifted, to encourage people who've not decided to follow yet to join in with you. That's what it means to be a minister. Keep it simple. I know that there's lots of other stuff that gets in to complicate it. I get that. But when you break it down, those are the things that it amounts to. Most other stuff can fit somewhere in there. And then we've got a good understanding of ourselves built around a biblical theme that we can then work with. So we're trying to do that. And this is a rant now, so forgive me, about understanding things in theological terms. So I prefer words like disciple and pastor, and for the church leadership I prefer deacon rather than any other language. You see, this is not to deny the legal realities that we're all, if we're in a charity, we're all trustees. This is not to deny the legal realities of the situation. It is not to say that those things don't exist. It is to say we're not supposed to be just another charity. Charities get called into being, for very good reasons, by humans. But we're supposed to believe that the church is called into being by God. Why would it have the same names as everything else? If we borrow the names from elsewhere, it helps us to think that we're the same sort of organisation as they are. But we're not. So actually using the biblical language is a constant reminder that before we're legal, before we're charitable, we are theological. And I wanted Bristol Baptist College to, with its very secular sounding name of college, I wanted it to understand itself as a kind of biblical community, just as I want the churches to see themselves in that way. We've already had the comment. I've got a big section here about women, but I feel like quite rightly that's already been addressed. But I did feel when I started that one of the things I wanted to address was the imbalance between the sexes in the college. I think there were about 15% of the students, ministerial students, were women when I began. Rather higher numbers among the CYM, the youth work students. And I am pleased to say that today it's more like 50%. I would love to claim that this has got anything to do with me. But the same thing has happened in most of the Baptist colleges. I'm just pleased that I've not got in the way too much. So I do believe that God has done something among us there, but I don't believe that the journey is yet complete for all of us. But it was very important to me that if we are going to prepare women for ministry, there must be women role models among the tutors and elsewhere in the college. And I have to say that the very first huff that I had with the college council was to ensure that that happened. But I'm very grateful to the women who have been prepared to serve with us. I'm grateful for their friendship and for their tolerance and for their willingness to teach me with patience, because I have a lot to learn. So I feel like we've achieved something there, even if I don't feel that that journey is complete. I've been much less successful with the other big ambition, which was around racial diversity. And we've had some wonderful students of colour. We've had wonderful white people from other parts of the world. But somehow we've not yet broken through on this one. It's been ones and twos and threes, and I really wanted that to change. At one point we managed to recruit a tutor of colour, and I was delighted, and then within a year disappointed that he chose to leave. But he did have a significant impact on us, and we've learned a lot through the processes, but I guess constantly recognising that we're not there yet. That may be a function of the churches in the region from which we primarily draw our students, but that should not be an excuse. Okay. I want to talk about the ways I've tried to do things. Script. Other people love to talk about leadership, and I guess it's not a word that I can completely avoid, although some of its connotations deeply trouble me. Nevertheless, if there is, I think, such a thing as Christian leadership, this is what I think it is. It is enabling those around you to flourish. It is ensuring that you create the space and the opportunity for, in my case, my colleagues and my students to realise their potential, to discover their gifts and have opportunities to exercise them. That leadership is about the flourishing of the people that you have the privilege of leading. It is not primarily about you or what you do as a leader. It's about the impact that your leadership has on those whom you're there to serve. So that's how I've tried to understand things. I'm not suggesting for 1 minute that I've always succeeded, but that's been my goal. And part of this is recognising the nature of power in human communities. I've whittled on about this to you before, but somehow, left to their own devices, people, it's like churches when they go into vacancy, suddenly all sorts of things emerge from the woodwork and people start competing for power among one another. And one of the great things that a pastor can do, that a leader can do, is not exercise power, but make sure they hold on to it so that nobody else can try to exercise it, if you see what I mean. But what you do is you hold the ring. You create a space in which people can flourish around you so that they can then exercise their gifts without competition for power getting into the mix. And when there have to be discussions about how decisions are made, you chair those meetings which in a way which gives everybody a chance to speak, and where you're not trying to impose your own agenda, but allowing what God's agenda is to emerge from among God's people. So again, I'm not naive enough to think that I haven't occasionally been controlling or huffed to get my own way. I have, but I think that I've tried, even if I've many times failed, is to enable everybody else to flourish around me and to hold on to create a social space in which others can flourish without there being competition among us. That doesn't mean I've never banged people's heads together when I felt that they were competing unnecessarily. And the other thing I wanted to do when I started all those many years ago was, there were all these adverts on the telly at the time about televisions which were future-proof. Don't you remember? It was a lie. But I did like the idea of our ministers being future-proof. This idea that somehow they should be ready for the future that God's going to throw at us. Now, many people, when they talk about this, they start off by pretending that they know what the future is going to look like, and then telling you that if you're going to future-proof your ministers, you have to prepare them for that. Nobody knows. God alone knows what the church will be in 5 or 10 years' time. I get all these letters from very well-meaning people telling me what ought to be in the curriculum. And it was nearly always whatever the trendy thing that was around at the time was. And those trends have come and they've gone. You can't future-proof your ministers by telling them about all the latest projects and programs that you can take off the peg and deliver in your churches. At least I don't think so. The only way you could do it is by helping them to become the kind of reflective practitioners, the kinds of theological thinkers that can take whatever the world throws at them and think about it for themselves theologically. And so understanding how God thinks, theology, what the Bible teaches, what the church has come up against in the past and how it's responded well or badly, that's how you create theological thinkers. And that's the only way to future-proof your ministers. That's the conclusion I've reached. And so it's been our goal to create ministers who know how to think biblically and theologically. Not to teach them how to run a program, but it's also been our goal to make them not chief executives or lead administrators of churches, but pastors of God's people. Because that's what I'm an old-fashioned guy that I am. I still think that's the calling. Am I getting in the way of the camera? I don't care. That's why we're training pastors, people who will disciple the people of God, not people who will manage them, people who will run or administer organisations. One of the things I notice as I look at some of our churches and some of our discussions as a denomination is we've become more and more pragmatic. Now, some pragmatism is good, don't misunderstand me, but we ask ourselves, does it work? And then we say, well, if it does work, it must be good. And if it's good, it must be right. And somehow we've got our ideas about God over here and the things which we think are working over there, and no necessary connection between the two. Now, if we're not careful, we become functionally atheist. It's not that we don't believe in God, we don't believe God's got, or what our ideas about God have got much to do with what works and therefore what we're going to do. Before any of that, we're bearers of the gospel of Christ. We're bearers of the word of God. Surely the things that we believe God is like because of the gospel and because of the scripture must influence the way we do things. So let's get rid of any disconnect between the two and make sure that everything we're doing is really grounded in what we learn about God from the gospel and from the scriptures as a whole. Let me illustrate this by telling you a story about when I first started. There'd been a long report about the future of ministerial formation from the denomination that we partner with quite closely. And I was sent off on a succession of ecumenical meetings where we were trying to decide how we were going to implement this particular report. You remember the one that I mean?
Oh, yes. Why do you think I left?
Yeah, I know. And so I'd be in these meetings, and there would be all the mainstream denominations, including us, were represented. And whatever it said, whatever it claimed in the report about the ideological ideas behind it, in my head, the market was the driving force behind everything that was said. And you could tell this was true because as soon as we got into the room, we were divided into providers on one side and users on the other. That they might as well have said you're buyers and sellers. And so the conversation would go, so trying to set things up. Those on the buying side would look at those of us on the selling side and say, what courses have you got? And we'd go, what courses would you like? And they go, we don't want to tell you what we want. We want to look at what all the providers are offering and decide which ones we like. And I go, we can do whatever anybody else is doing, don't we? We're all driven into a position where we're competing with each other rather than cooperating with each other. And if you're not careful, you get a race to the bottom. Because what they really want is something that's as cheap as possible and something which is as convenient as possible for the group of users that they've managed to recruit that year. And I want to say, hang on, shouldn't we be asking first what our end product is supposed to be? Who are these ministers? What are they like? I want to say, surely we need to invest in them to make sure that the things I was talking about before, biblical thinkers, people able to think theologically. And surely that's going to have to be done in a community of formation. This has got to be done in a particular way. And then once we can all agree what we want, then we can decide what kind of course is appropriate. And then we know what it's going to cost. We can figure out how to pay for it. No. They don't want to do it that way. They want to. And so I found myself at odds because I felt like a wrong ideology was being driven into our processes. It's not that I think there's no room for the market in this. It's just that we need to make it serve us rather than control us. The churches collectively need to decide what it is we want, who it is we want our ministers to be. Who do we want shepherding the people of God? And then ensure that that's what we're offering. It also taught me a big lesson about the fate of reports. I learned that you should always, a report comes out, you should always cooperate, always try to do it, but never think for one moment that it's necessarily going to get implemented. The reason that other report fell down, so I shouldn't say this, don't tell them up the road that I've said this. We're all sat there thinking, there's the provinces and the dioceses and the circuits and the associations and the colleges, and we're all sat there thinking, we've got to give this a go, because the Anglicans, who are the big brother, big sister in all of this, are the ones driving it. So, we'll give it a go. We'll get on board with this. It didn't happen because the bishops in the neighbouring dioceses couldn't agree with each other. So all the ecumenical partners are going, yeah, we'll give this a go. But the bishops couldn't agree amongst themselves what they wanted, and so the whole thing floundered. So they had to find another way to bring the market into the thing. Those bishops may be taking me to one side going, I'm a Baptist, really. I was brought up in such and such Gas Street Baptist Church. As if that was going to make them popular with me. Okay, then you should know better. Of which more in a minute. The other bee I've got in my bonnet is about... I'll start that again. Somebody came up to me at an open day recently and talked about their sense of a call to ministry and how they'd gone to college when they were 18. I think it was to the London School of Theology. And the principal had taken them to one side along with all the others of a similar age and said, don't go into ministry, not yet. Go and get a job He got a job and he liked his job, and despite this strong call to ministry, here was a retired person in front of me saying, perhaps it's time to do some theology. Now, I'm sure that in the purposes of God, if someone truly had a call, they'd have found a way to exercise it. But it does trouble me that we're saying to lots of young people, you can't be a minister yet. You need things other than the call of God to start this journey. And this troubles me, and it's always troubled me. It's not that I don't want people in their 30s and 40s and 50s and even older coming into our colleges. It's just I don't want us to be infected by these, forgive me, these ways of thinking which are based on anything other than what is God calling. Who is God calling? So if God is calling older people, I rejoice. But if he's calling younger people, let's not turn them away and say, come back in a few years. Let's say, you are just what our churches may be needing. And I'm pleased to say that over the years we've done this. And there are people who came to us in their late teens and early 20s who are now naval chaplains and regional ministers and pastors of churches and chaplains in interesting places, because we believed in people of whatever age they are. And I do want us to recover that challenge. Look at my scriptures, and I think, well, you could describe as the Apostle Paul as being on his second career, I suppose, depending on how you look at those things. I think Moses had probably had 3 or 4 jobs before he got called. I remember preaching a sermon about how he was called at 80. I was taken aside by somebody who used to sit about where Jade is now every Sunday. He took me to one side. It was David Russell, former General Secretary of the Baptist Union. He said, you do realise, Steve, that there are some of us in this congregation who regard Moses as a bit of a young whippersnapper getting called at 80. So I had to learn my lesson about my implicit ageism. But there are other examples. David was really young when I know he made loads of mistakes, but David was young when he was called. John was young. Coming out of the Bible for a moment, Spurgeon was young when he was called. There are all kinds of examples of people of all ages being called of God surprising us. So let's not rule them out. I think we too often do. I remember when I was talking about me coming here, somebody saying, oh, if he's just out of college, no good for us. And until somebody pointed out that I was just out of college, but I was in my late 30s and had been overseas and had done all the... And then they said, oh, well, perhaps that'll be all right then. And I'm thinking, is this God or not? I read somewhere that somebody had polled constituency Conservative parties about what they wanted from their parliamentary candidates. Who was their ideal parliamentary candidate? And it turned out that the ideal parliamentary candidate for Conservative constituency parties is a man in his late 30s or early 40s, who's married and with a young family and with a career behind them. And I thought, that sounds suspiciously like what many of our churches want. Now, not only are we thinking like the world, we're thinking like constituency Conservative parties. I'm sure Conservatives sometimes have some sensible ideas, but I'm not sure that we want to be thinking about how we understand God entirely in the same way that they do. So, one of my agendas is to encourage the churches to think about not what their ideals are, but who God is calling. Having said that, when I got here, I was 39 and married with a young family, so that can be good too, I think. What matters is that whoever they are, old or young, there's a passion there. You know, there's an enthusiasm there which will infect others. That people are able to talk about the gospel, talk about Jesus, talk about God, talk about the scriptures, as though it matters to them. We had a student once she was in love. And you just knew it. You know, she would sit at the table and she would be smiling and she'd get up and go away and the smile would still be there. Yeah. It just infected you because there was something she was passionate about. And that's, in the end, this idea that God has got a hold of you and is the one that is motivating you. That's what we want from our ministers. Yes, we want them to be theologically educated. Yes, we want them to know the scriptures. But in the end, it's about whether God has taken hold of them and is moving them on and inspiring other people through them. That's what I want. That's what I've always wanted. But secondly, I want them to love God's people. Too often, churches get ministers who seem to hold their churches in contempt, as though the church is there to enable them to carry out their mission, rather than them being there to enable the church to carry out its mission. As though the deacons are there to be broken into submission, where the church meeting is kind of treated as the disloyal opposition, as though they're the only ones in the church with a calling or a hotline to God. So yes, sometimes churches need to be challenged, but mostly it's easier to challenge them when they know that you love them and they can see that your goal is to nurture them and to enable them to flourish. So in my mind, that's what we want. So ministry, never a power trip. It's not about the exercise of power or holding on to it. But we also want people who love the world and who love the mission of God and who have Jesus' passion for the poor, who are prepared to put word and deed into harmony, serving and summoning, allowing the kingdom to be seen in glimpses so that people can be called to repentance in the light of what God is doing. That's what we need. To love God with a passion, to love the church, to seek to nurture it, and to love the world and to seek it, to summon it, to be part of what God is doing. And for good, you can't do that if your motivation for starting is because you want people to like you. You'll get nothing done that way. On the other hand, you can't start this game because you want other people, you want to be the one that's up front. That way you won't enable others. The only way to do this is to know somewhere within yourself and have it affirmed by others around you that the reason you feel called to this is because it's God who's placed that calling in your life. So, I better finish. I've gone on too long. I believe in this college passionately because I believe that the things that I care about ministry are things that are really significant. And that's why I hope I've tried to put my all into those that have been misfortunate enough to be sent across my path. I care about you and your ministry because I care passionately about the churches, that they are something that God has called into being for the sake of his mission. And I care about the churches because I care about the kingdom of God and how it impacts the world. So I'm not saying you're just a means to an end, and that's the only reason I care about you. But there's a sense in which that's true. because the driving force of it all is a desire to see God's kingdom breaking in. But I believe that can only happen through or mostly happens through the work of the church, and I believe it happens best when they are pastored by people who are passionate and committed and love God and love the church and care about his kingdom. So I guess those are the things that I think I've been doing, but there's one more. I first walked into a Baptist church in my early 20s. It was like coming home to a home I didn't know I had, and I have felt at home in them ever since. Forgive me, I know there's lots of value in other traditions, but they'll never be for me. Our commitments to the baptism of believers, our commitment to collective discernment, our commitment to the mission of God, our commitment to the scriptures mean that this way of doing church seems to me to have something profound to offer a world where everybody looks to hierarchies and to marketplaces and to power, and whereas we look to one another and to God. And it seems, in my mind, that is something precious that is worth preserving. And so I've also tried to help ministers to see the value, all that is best in our tradition, and to seek to see that expressed in the churches that they serve. Because while I recognise that the word Baptist in our name is not the greatest advertising slogan ever written, to me, the word Baptist carries this kind of cluster of really significant things that actually matter. That it is a way of being community that is of profound significance, and what the world, even if it doesn't know it, is actually crying out for. That will start to address some of the deepest needs for community and a sense of belonging that are out there in the world that we engage with the gospel. So, I think we're in fairly good heart. I think the college is in a pretty good place. I trust I'm handing over something worthwhile to a successor, and that it won't be me that drops the baton. But most of all, what I feel, my legacy, insofar as I have one, it's not the college, lovely as it is. It's the former students that I've worked with, whose ministries I trust will flourish, so that the churches are well served and that the kingdom advances. God bless you.
That is such a privilege just to sit under Steve's sharing and to hear again his heart. For those who've been away from college for a while, you probably really missed that. I really did. Wasn't that just extraordinary? Thank you so much, Steve. My name's Matt. I'm here as a trustee and alumni, ex-student. And some things you're asked to do in life are not easy, but some things are. And giving a few positive words about the man we just heard share his heart is definitely the latter. Yes, the latter. Easy. Giving thanks on behalf of this group is a huge privilege to share something of the gratitude all of us feel to you, Steve, for what you've done as principal of this Baptist College. In a week that I'm sure, Steve, you were squirming at the weekend, but where much thought has been given to leadership in different ways, and hearing you again talk about it seems fitting to be thanking someone whose leadership I think we all genuinely admire and are thankful to God for. After the coronation on Saturday, I was amused, if not bemused, when the evening anchor on the news stated with some sense of excitement that the new king had declared He wished to serve and not be served. It was said as if it was some new great discovery, some new thought. Did you hear what he said? But of course, this has been the way of Christ and his call to every leader from the very beginning. And I think you'll agree with me, it's true to say that Steve has lived faithfully to this call. We heard it again. As a student, he taught us, and you'll be pleased, Steve, we were listening. One of the most important lessons in Christian ministry is that it's not about you. Do you remember him saying that? It sounds like the most sort of hurtful thing anyone could say to you. It's not about you, but it's true. He told us clearly it's about Jesus and his church and his mission and his kingdom. And we heard it again today. And whilst these few words here, and I'm sure many other thank yous, will, much to your discomfort, Steve, be about you, and you're going to have to like and lump that, it's true to say that you made your principalship all about Jesus and about his church and about the good of the college and the staff and the students. And we recognised it. You intended to do that, and we recognise that you did that and have done that and continue to do that. As all who have been through the college under your care, Steve, would agree, you've left a deep and profound impression of Christ-like leadership on us all. As a trustee, basically I'm the trustee with no skills. I'm on the board, they're all sort of very capable accountants and legal people, and there's me as a minister not having a clue really what to say, but I often have lots to say, and sometimes, occasionally, one of my words might have some wisdom in it, very occasionally. However, Steve, I've found to be someone who did not need to speak much, but he didn't need to dominate every conversation or have the final word. But when he did speak, every word was worth listening to. And I believe the reason for that is because you've consistently led, Steve, with a deep Christ-centeredness, with your unswerving commitment to good theology and considered judgments. The wisdom and insights you've brought to everything from a quick phone call or conversation over coffee through to a lecture or a board meeting have always been profound and rooted in Jesus. And in tandem with this, your pastoral heart and your genuine care have allowed a sense of community and family and safety to flourish under your watch. I love the fact that that's what you intended, and that's what we noted, both as trustees and within the broader college community. You may have also noticed with Steve, he carries what many refer to as a non-anxious presence. Have you noticed that? Carry a peace with you, Steve, a calm, even if others are getting stressed. And you may say you haven't got a clue what's going on within Matt, but that may be true, but we don't see it. In fact, over the years, I've witnessed that nothing seems to faze you, Steve, or rarely. You seem largely unflappable, not least in Peru, may I say, when you headed up our mission trip there, which was certainly at times unpredictable, as every good mission trip should be. But even when we students, you can imagine this with me for a moment, are on a boat, sailing down the Amazon River, looking at pink dolphins jump out of the Amazon, squealing with delight, overexcited. Steve is dressed in a cream suit and a straw hat, looking like the man from Del Monte. Just Don Finamore lying back at the back of the boat, fast asleep. He's seen it all before. Not even pink dolphins on the Amazon can break a sweat from Steve. But seriously, and perhaps most of all, I wish to thank you for how you've helped me personally, with wisdom, with advice, with challenge, with time, unusual openness to giving your time again and again, with acceptance and encouragement and belief in me when I struggle to believe in myself. You have played a huge part in the reason I am in ministry today, and I'm so thankful to you, and I know my story is echoed and repeated through so many students and staff that have had the privilege to be blessed by your ministry and leadership, Steve. So thank you as a trustee board, as students, as alumni here. Every one of us are genuinely grateful to God for your example to us and your leadership over these last 17 years. Will you join me in just thanking Steve again? Just to say, Steve, we will miss you hugely, personally and as a college. We look forward to Don Finamore in his cream suit, I trust, as our BU president, visiting our churches with your straw hat. I'd love that. But we wish God's richest blessing in all you'll continue to do for him in this new season. So bless you, Steve. Thank you.